The whole idea of being Orthodox in the 21st century poses an immense amount of problems in the American culture, first and foremost, because American culture is almost antithetical to Orthodoxy. It's built around distraction. It's built around every form of lust for power, money, sex, enjoyment. All of these things are critical in the American psyche, it seems. It's built into our movies. It's baked into our literature, into our news. Power flows from the American mind into the American culture, because the American culture is just sucking it up, whereas for Orthodox, our minds need to be quiet, our minds need to be stayed upon God. All of these things act as, I don't want to say buffers from God, but certainly draws away from God. And this is something, the prosperity isn't in and of itself the problem. God said to Israel, once you are in the land and you are established, and I've heaped all these blessings on you, the great danger is that you will forget me. And this is the thing, it brings forgetfulness instead of mindfulness. And I think that this is the big challenge for the Orthodox. Now, our life is supposed to be built around getting rid of these things. We've just been through Lent and through Pascha, and I know of a particular Orthodox who largely thinks of Holy Week as almost this military interrogation to break you down. And in one sense, it actually does do that. It makes us focus so that by the time Holy Friday gets here, I'm not worn down, but I am so focused on what is happening. And this is what our whole Orthodox life is supposed to be, focusing on God. And I think that this, for people coming from the outside, and I think historically, the Bulgarians, this goes back to the 9th century. The Bulgarians are looking to convert to Christianity, but they look at Orthodoxy and they see two things. Well, the one thing is they see the imperial capital. They don't want to be a satellite of Constantinople. But the other thing they see is all this fasting. Half a year in fasting? Rome doesn't ask us to do this. And so I think that those are some of the challenges, is that people see Orthodoxy, and of course it is so strange in their minds. I've had people say, that's not the Christ I grew up with. I mean, just the iconography is just different. But so I think those are the challenges, is that we are a peculiar people and we do peculiar things. This is an enormous, enormous question, but I think that I will get to the one that I've thought about the most, and that is the question of what is the state. And the state, as we know it, is actually a very modern invention that's only been around for a few hundred years. The idea of this corporate fiction that exists separately from the body of the people, or let us say the aristocracy, or even the king. And this goes back to the statement often attributed to Louis XIV, I am the state. And at the time that our faith first explodes into the world in the Roman Empire, and the whole idea that then comes out into the Middle Ages, into the Byzantine Empire, the state is nothing apart from the people itself. There's an excellent book written, I don't agree with all of it, called The Byzantine Republic. I mean, it was an empire. It was ruled by an emperor. How can we think of it as a republic? And of course, there's a great deal that's very involved in all this question, but as far as the modern myth is, it is that somehow the state can exist and have a sovereignty over individuals greater than the sovereignty they should have over themselves. And by this, I'm not calling for anarchy. To be honest, I am a bit of an anarchist, but in the way that Tolkien talked about being an anarchist. I don't want to be some whiskered bomb thrower or anything like that, but instead that the most important questions in life are the questions that involve you, your family, your neighborhood, your town. Right? So therefore, what has happened is that we've become so enamored, and I think this is part of what makes us so polarized in the United States. Oh, I'm all for Trump. Oh, I'm all for Obama. And one side or the other is the devil. And therefore we've almost idolized this power. And I've heard people talking about Washington, D.C. being this imperial capital. And it's just like, well, I think the Byzantines would like that imperial capital, or Rome, given how much power people attribute to it. I'm not arguing against the state per se. What I am saying is that even we as Christians can become involved in this, and it just becomes another myth that we throw ourselves into. There was a very good book written by a Jew, Ernst Cassirer, simply entitled The Myth of the State. And he's coming out of Nazi Germany, where it had its own mythos around it. And I think that for us, it's kind of weeding through a lot of the political rhetoric, which so captivates our minds. And in one sense, this is another thing that's pulling us away from our Christian faith, from our rule of prayer. And ultimately, when we sit down to think about it, so much of our political arguments are really about the means we want to use to accomplish human flourishing. Ultimately, people on the left and people on the right, they're really interested in how do I love my neighbor and how do I help them flourish. And so what we all agree on this. What we're really arguing over is what is the best means to do this. And so I think this is one of the really big myths. I think going hand in glove with that is, for lack of a better term, the myth of democracy, that somehow we collectively can exercise sovereignty over individuals. And there's problems with political authority. And I think we need to rethink these before we actually start getting at each other's throats. And because the political rhetoric is becoming so heightened. But for most people, we will never, ever, ever influence public policy. But I can influence what's going on in my town and in my family and with my friends and with my students. And all the energy I can expand on how much I hate Trump or how much I love Trump. I should actually be expending that on my students, my wife, my daughter, my parish. So I think this is one of the great myths, and it's one of the real soul-corrupting myths of the 21st century.
Did years burn out those words? Did a voice whisper absurd? Did your mind comprehend and ask if you'd last till the end?